Hello, and welcome to today's session on the Specialisation Verification Framework for My Aged Care. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that wherever we're meeting across Australia, we're doing so on the lands of traditional owners. We're recording this session on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and we'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and a special welcome to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us for this session. My name is Dale Park, and together with my colleague Lisa Dean, we are the Regional Advisor for Diversity and Wellness for the East Metropolitan Region of Melbourne. Today's session is all about supporting your understanding of the Specialisation Verification Framework for My Aged Care, which commenced on the 27th of June 2022. We hope that by the end of the session, you will understand what the Specialisation Verification Framework is and how it aligns and builds on the diversity activities of your organisation. We encourage you to participate in this session with others in your organisation and reflect on what is needed to progress. We'd like to start this session by sharing a short video. The Aged Care Act 1997 identifies particular communities who have experienced a history of discrimination, exclusion, or disadvantage. For many older people who belong to these communities, they've experienced this inequality from a young age, and it can still carry through into their older years and impact their ability or their willingness to engage with aged care services. In recognition of the inequality, limited access, and sometimes worse health outcomes they can experience, the Aged Care Act recognised that there needed to be additional education, support, and tailoring of services to bridge the gap, making services welcoming and inclusive, and ensuring equity of access and outcome. The groups identified in the Act are referred to as special needs groups. So how do these groups align with the idea of specialisation?
To date, organisations have been able to nominate one or more special needs group for whom they provide specialised services or support to. These specialisations are promoted via your publicly accessible page in My Aged Care to consumers, who in turn use the Find a Provider search function to identify providers that specialise in the care that is most likely to meet their needs. We know that all aged care services have a responsibility to reflect and respond to the diverse characteristics, life experiences, and needs of all service users. However, currently, if a provider opts to indicate a specialisation on the My Aged Care website, it is expected that the services and supports offered go beyond the requirement placed on all providers as outlined in the Aged Care Quality Standards. The expectation is that providers who nominate a specialisation should be able to demonstrate how they offer a specialised service. However, to date, there has been no process in place to verify these claims.
Given that the framework we are talking about today relates specifically to your organisation's specialised services promoted on My Aged Care, we'd like you to take a moment to reflect on your current interaction with the My Aged Care Find a Provider tool. What we'd like you to do is select the statement which best reflects your interaction with your organisation's public page on My Aged Care. The next question that we'd like you to consider is, does your organisation promote a specialisation on My Aged Care? For example, a specialisation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, for culturally and linguistically diverse people, for care leavers, LGBTI, or others. So why are these questions important?
According to a recent analysis of current patterns in aged care specialisation, CHSP providers were least likely to nominate a specialisation, with 49% not nominating specialisations compared to only 22% for home care package providers and 30% for residential aged care. CHSP providers that nominated specialisation most frequently nominated 4 special needs groups. And of these, 3 were the populations with the existing guidelines for specialisations, although interestingly, an initial survey of aged care providers to determine the level of awareness of the current guidelines revealed that 52% of providers were not aware the guidelines for nominating specialisation actually existed. So why is specialisation verification important? We've made a short video to explain.
Think about a time when you, as a consumer, were seeking to access or buy a new product or service. You probably get online, scan the market to identify the product or the service that best meets your needs, whether that be financial, convenience, or based on the reputation. We all want to access products and services that we think are going to be most aligned with our needs, preferences, and interests. We want to know that the products and services are going to be safe and considerate of all our individual and specific circumstances. Much like the online sites that we access to inform our decisions, the information your organisation enters on My Aged Care is available to the public who view the information via the Find a Provider tool. And of course, the information is also available to the Regional Assessment Service. It's therefore important that the information accurately reflects your program, activities, and target audience. The information comes directly from the material your organisation enters into the provider portal. This information should be regularly reviewed to ensure it's up to date and displaying correctly so that consumers can make informed decisions about their choice of provider. While it may not be your responsibility to update the information, we should all be aware of how our organisation is promoted through My Aged Care, and you may be able to provide feedback internally about any anomalies. And of course, if you identify information that needs updating, your organisation can make these changes via the provider portal, which will subsequently appear the next day in the Find a Provider tool.
In this session, we will introduce you to the new Specialisation Verification Framework for My Aged Care. We'll look at the key features of the framework, including the 2-tiered specialisation criteria, expectations around the verification and certification processes, and we'll discuss what you can be doing to meet the requirements of the new specification framework. By way of background, the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety was critical of the accuracy of the information entered by aged care providers in the My Aged Care Find a Provider tool. Specifically, the lack of processes to verify and monitor that the information, including specialisations for which providers claimed. In the final report, Recommendation 30, Designing for Diversity, Difference, Complexity and Individuality, stated there should be verification to ensure that the provider has proper grounds for making any representation of being able to provide specialised services for groups of people with diverse backgrounds and life experiences. The development and introduction of the Specialisation Validation Framework seeks to address this recommendation. The Department of Health engaged Australian Healthcare Associates to develop a framework to ensure the providers' specialisation claims are checked to improve the My Aged Care Find a Provider reliability. The draft framework sets out the criteria for providers which shows how they can deliver care beyond minimum care. Development involves senior Australians and representatives helping to develop the proposed activities, and it also included providers testing their findings.
So what is the purpose of the framework? Primarily, it's expected that the framework and the certification, which is the end result of verifying your organization's specialization, will help to embed a true and evidence-based focus on diversity in the aged care system, as it will hold service providers accountable for areas they say they specialize in. Hopefully, it will also encourage service providers to focus more on diversity and provide a pathway to becoming a provider of choice because of the specialization areas that particular organization covers. It will help senior Australians, their families, loved ones, friends, families of choice, and anyone involved in their care to choose providers that meet their needs. We will look at the actual framework shortly, but essentially the specialisation framework stipulates a number of criteria that organisations must meet to be able to identify their organisation as a specialist provider. Each special needs group has their own criteria, which is based on feedback from representatives of those groups. A significant proportion of the criteria is focused across 5 key themes. These are connections between your organization and local community organizations that represent the demographic of the target audience, education and training, and where training is required, you need to provide evidence that 90% of staff have completed the training. Consumer engagement through the established advisory groups or board representation, policies and procedures that describe how you support and promote the delivery of specialized aged care to a particular group, and consumer feedback that looks to gather the experiences of consumers within your service. While each specification area has their own unique set of criteria, the majority of the outcomes are focused on 5 key themes. The framework provides an example of the evidence that might demonstrate performance against each of the specialization criteria. For the key focus areas we just described, these might include demonstrating that you can describe the established connection between the local community who represents your target audience, including any previously conducted or planned activity. Or it might involve confirmation by the local community group, for example, through the establishment of a memorandum of understanding. When we're thinking about training, the details of the training undertaken over a 12-month period and the percentage of staff engaged in the training will need to be provided. You might also include board documentation that clearly specifies the involvement or attendance by representatives of the target audience or actions taken and the frequency of the meetings. When we're thinking about evidence for policies and procedures, this may include details about how specialized care is delivered or supported, or you might provide examples of how these policies and procedures promote the delivery of specialized care. And finally, evidence may involve the care recipients, providing positive, written, or verbal feedback through AHA's independent feedback process.
The framework includes a 2-tiered specialisation criteria. So tier 1 are those for which evidence of specialisation is strong enough to warrant a lighter touch. In many cases, an independent body, external organisation or regulatory group has already conducted an evaluation of the service provider's specialisation, or the service provider is a member of a representative body of that special needs group. So as such, comprehensive review may not be warranted, or it may be considered that it places unnecessary burden upon a provider, considering that evidence has been supplied previously to gain funding or accreditation. So meeting a single Tier 1 criteria would qualify the service provider to nominate specialisation for that special needs group. It should also be noted that some special needs groups do not have a Tier 1 criteria, as no appropriate criteria was identified. So Tier 2 represents criteria for which the service providers are required to provide varied supporting evidence. Tier 2 criteria would require a comprehensive review to verify the accuracy of the provider's claim for specialisation. So to be able to claim a specialisation, providers must meet at least 4 criteria listed in lieu of a Tier 1 criteria. So where there are less than 4 Tier 2 criteria, providers must meet all of the relevant Tier 2 criteria. So just as an example, if we think about homelessness or those at risk of homelessness, within the framework, there are only 3 level 2 criteria, and you would be required to meet all of those. So let's look at the criteria for each of the 9 groups.
This is a typical layout of the framework that is used for each of the special needs groups. The specification for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders includes 13 criteria. It identifies whether the criteria is a Tier 1 or a Tier 2, and it includes examples of the evidence to demonstrate performance against each criteria. As per the highlighted criteria and the evidence example, the specifications for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders includes 2 Tier 1 criteria. These are for Aboriginal and/or Torres Strait Islander community-controlled organisations and providers funded by the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Flexible Aged Care Program. If you don't meet the Tier 1 criteria, then you would need to demonstrate evidence against at least 4 of the remaining Tier 2 criteria, keeping in mind that the criteria describes the minimum that your organisation has in place to engage and support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples within your service model. As described earlier, you can see the 5 key focus areas highlighted here. These criteria relate to demonstrating links with community who represent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, education and training, consumer engagement, policies and procedures, and consumer feedback about their experience of the service. The corresponding evidence example are also highlighted. In addition to the 5 key focus areas shown on the previous slide, the additional criteria relates to the makeup of those accessing the service, that 50% of your participants identify as Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, or that staff members proportionate to the general population identify as Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. Importantly, these staff must be well-resourced and supported by management to act as champions within the organisation to support other staff. Other criteria relate to the provision of services in local Indigenous languages and the regular recognition and participation in local cultural celebrations.
The framework for people from culturally, linguistically diverse backgrounds includes 11 criteria. You will note that there is no level 1 criteria for this group. So all organisations will need to demonstrate that they are meeting a minimum of 4 criteria through a comprehensive review of evidence. Again, the key themes highlighted here in yellow are embedded in this criteria, with the remaining criteria relating to bilingual and bicultural staff who were well-resourced and supported to act as champions within the organisation and to support other staff. Other criteria relates to provision of services in languages other than English and the provider's recognition and support in local cultural celebrations.
The specification for people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or intersex includes 11 criteria, of which one is a tier 1. This criteria relates to organizations that are Rainbow Tick accredited. If this is your organization, you would be required to provide a copy of the Rainbow Tick accreditation certificate by way of evidence. In addition to the key focus areas, the LGBTI specification criteria relates to the employment of one or more staff members who identify as either lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, or queer. And again, you would need to be able to demonstrate that the staff members are well resourced and supported by management to act as champions within the organization to support other staff and clients. Alternative criteria may involve the provider recognizing and participating in local LGBTI celebrations and events or displaying evidence of its public commitment to support people from the LGBT and I communities.
To identify as a specialist or provide specialist services for people who live in rural and remote areas, your organisation is predominantly required to receive the Viability Supplement. This is funding that's automatically paid to help aged care providers with the cost of service delivery in rural and remote areas. And this generally applies to home care package providers and residential aged care only. All other providers must meet the remaining Tier 2 criteria. The remaining Tier 2 criteria relate specifically to providers who are located or support clients in specific areas under the modified Monash model, or those organisations who have established connections and regular engagement with providers which assist people who live in rural and remote areas.
Specification for people who are experiencing financial or social disadvantage include 5 criteria. The 2 Tier 1 criteria applies to those delivering assistance with care and housing services, or is a care finder organization that focuses on clients who are experiencing financial or social disadvantage, and providers who qualify for the homelessness supplement. If these don't apply to your organization, you will need to demonstrate that you meet the remaining 3 Level 2 criteria through a comprehensive review of evidence process. The Tier 2 criteria for this group relates to how your organization enables access to services for people who may be unable to pay, that providers have policies and procedures in place to support and promote the delivery of services to people who are experiencing financial or social disadvantage, and that providers offer services specifically targeted towards people who are experiencing financial or social disadvantage. This might be evidenced by providing a description of services or feedback from consumers.
The specifications for veterans includes 11 criteria. All criteria are Tier 2, so your organisation will be required to demonstrate outcomes against a minimum of 4 of the criteria through a comprehensive review of evidence. Specifications for veterans, again, include criteria focusing on the key areas around education and training and consumer engagement. There are 5 additional alternative criteria for this group, including that the provider is a not-for-profit veteran community organisation, that one or more staff members is a veteran and again is well-resourced and supported to act as a champion within the organisation to support other staff and clients, that a specified portion of staff understand and make consumers aware of the services that they and their families can continue to access through the Department of Veteran Affairs, that the physical environment is considered appropriate and safe for consumers as determined by a veteran representative, and that the provider organises commemoration ceremonies or helps consumers attend local community commemoration events.
Specification for people who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness include 5 criteria. It's important to note that for the purpose of specialization, this group also includes people who have experienced homelessness in the past. As per the specification for people who are experiencing financial or social disadvantage, there are 2 Tier 1 criteria for providers which relate to those delivering assistance with care and housing services, or if the organization is a care finder that focuses on clients who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, and providers for whom 50% or more of the residents have been assessed as being homeless and have a relevant behavioral diagnosis. Again, if these don't apply to your organization, then you will need to demonstrate that you meet the remaining 3 Level 2 criteria. The Level 2 criteria, as with other groups, are focused specifically on established connections, staff training, policies, and procedures.
Care leavers is one of the groups in our community that has attracted the least specialisation to date. It should be noted here that the term care leaver includes forgotten Australians, former child migrants, and the stolen generations. So different terms may be preferred by people from this group, with some preferring not to be labelled at all. The specifications include 8 criteria, all of which are Tier 2. So organisations must be able to demonstrate outcomes against a minimum of 4 of these criteria through a comprehensive review of evidence and certification process. In addition to the key focus criteria, providers can submit evidence that one or more staff member identify as being a care leaver and that they are well resourced and supported to act as a champion within the organisation to support other staff. The other criteria requires providers to demonstrate that the physical environment is considered safe and appropriate for care leavers as determined by a care leaver representative.
Much like care leavers, parents separated from their children by forced adoption or removal practices is another group in our community that has attracted the least specialization to date. Again, the specification includes 9 criteria, all of which are Tier 2. So organizations must be able to demonstrate outcomes against a minimum of 4 criteria. In addition to the key focus criteria, providers can submit evidence that demonstrates that one or more staff members is a parent who was separated from a child by forced adoption or removal practices, and that they are well resourced and supported by management to act as champions within the organization to support care recipients and other staff. Another criteria concerns the physical environment and that it is considered safe and appropriate by a representative of the forced adoption community. And finally, another criteria is about the established connection between the provider and local dental and medical facilities so that support can be provided to consumers who are triggered by accessing these services. No doubt many of you will recognize most of the criteria in the framework. The criteria describes good diversity practice that we have been promoting for many years. This specialization verification framework builds on existing inclusive, wellness, and diversity quality activities aligned to the aged care quality standards, diversity action plans, and the Charter for Aged Care Rights. The criteria describes how organizations can demonstrate their inclusive service delivery approach to support consumers' choice and control, enabling consumers to make informed decisions to access safe and welcoming services where they are comfortable to be themselves. The specialization framework provides a good opportunity for you to review where your organization is at compared to the criteria. It gives you a pathway to continuous improvement and to being a provider of choice for specific communities. Not only is this aspirational, good practice, and supports communities who experience inequality, it also makes good business sense as it will set you apart from many other providers.
So the new framework commenced on the 27th of June 2022, and this includes the certification process for providers who identify as a specialist or deliver specialist services. So these providers are now able to apply for an audit, send evidence showing that they meet the requirements, and have the outcome published on their My Aged Care Finder Provider profile. So the department has advised that providers who do not have their specialisation claim confirmed will have those claims removed from their My Aged Care profile on the 27th of February 2023. So applications are submitted through the My Aged Care Provider portal for independent assessment by Australian Healthcare Associates. In order to prepare for the new framework, we encourage you to review your organisation's current specialisation in My Aged Care. Do they accurately reflect your specific target audience? You should also review the proposed framework for each of the 9 special need groups and conduct a self-assessment against the criteria for each. Consider which of these criteria may be relevant for your organisation. Which do you currently meet and which require further work? Answering these questions within the context of the self-assessment may involve gathering data or establishing new data sources. For example, community or client demographics, service information, workforce data, policy and procedure, or diversity planning priorities. This data sourcing will also support any certification application that your organisation seeks. The self-assessment and associated data gathering should enable you to identify potential areas for specialisation. You should document the agreed strategies that your organisation will progress to support future certification for your identified specialities in an implementation plan, and align these improvement activities with your organisation's quality improvement processes.
There is no requirement that all organisations are identified as specialists across all or any areas, but we encourage you to reflect on these questions. In which of the groups identified under the Aged Care Act do you identify your organisation as a specialist, or on your way to being a specialist? And consider why or why not you would want to be or are a specialist. What quality improvement activities can you identify to support certification for these specialities? We recommend that you talk with people in your organisation to consider and share your thoughts about where your organisation currently sits and how the specialisation criteria aligns with your organisation's quality improvement activities. This process can't be up to one person in the organisation. There needs to be support from the top, and it needs to be understood at all levels about why you're going through the specialisation verification process and what you hope to achieve through doing so.
The department has released a provider guide to support you through the application process, and I strongly encourage you to access this at the address on your screen. So the verification process involves lodging your application through the My Aged Care Service portal via the outlet administration tile. So broadly speaking, the process involves selecting the outlet for which you wish to submit a specialisation, selecting the special needs group specialisation. So for example, it might be for the called community, downloading the application, gathering and then uploading evidence to support your application, selecting the services for which the specialisation will apply. So it might be, for example, your social support program or allied health, and completing a declaration. Again, I strongly encourage you to access the guidance material that the department has produced to support you in this process. It should be noted that if you select a criteria that requires feedback from aged care recipients, you will need to follow an additional process, and we'll go through that process shortly. The AHA assessment team will assess your application and your supporting documentation. So if AHA have any questions about your application or need more information, they will contact you either via the portal, email, or by phone. And you should expect to be notified via email of the assessment outcome within approximately 20 business days of AHA receiving your supporting evidence. If your application has been successful, the verified specialisation and a tick icon will then be displayed on your My Aged Care provider profile.
Most of the specialisations covered by the framework have an aged care recipient feedback criteria. If you have selected this as a criteria, you should confirm this in the evidence pro forma mentioned earlier and email it to macspecialisation@health.gov.au. AHA will then send you an aged care recipient feedback form tailored to the special needs group or special needs groups that you have nominated in your application. To meet the evidence requirement for this criteria, it is your responsibility to arrange for feedback from your clients or their carers. Feedback can be given either in a written or verbal format, and the feedback must be given directly to AHA by telephone, email, or post. It's also really important for you to understand that part of your responsibility in this process is to provide aged care recipients or their representatives with information about how AHA will handle their personal information. You will be able to access the privacy policy from AHA. As part of your role in arranging feedback, you have a responsibility to promote the feedback opportunity to clients, as well as their carers or representatives. It's not about cherry picking a few who you think might say nice things about you. To promote the feedback opportunity, you might consider advertising the opportunity in your newsletter or other communications, such as email or via the post. It might be a great idea to discuss the opportunity to provide feedback with your clients and their carers, or display posters on site in a prominent place, such as the service entry. Alternatively, you could post information to social media or publish information on your website. However you do it, remember to use inclusive and accessible forms of promotion as required. This means thinking about things that are culturally specific, using large font, language that is engaging and meaningful to people. Remember, this is about your target audience that you're trying to reach. As mentioned earlier, AHA will provide you with a tailored feedback form. In addition to asking some optional demographic information of the recipient, the feedback form includes the questions appearing on your screen. These questions help AHA to determine your organization's claim to meeting the feedback criteria, and they primarily seek to learn about the consumer's experience and to verify that the care they receive is appropriate. For example, one of the questions asks that staff are trained and sensitive to their experiences and needs, and that appropriate services are offered. The feedback form also contains further guidance for aged care recipients, including all the contact details for giving feedback. For those who wish to provide verbal feedback, it may be appropriate for you to support them in setting up a time to give this feedback to AHA. This may be particularly important, for example, where an interpreter is required. Letting AHA know the aged care recipient's name, contact details, preferred contact time, and language required will allow AHA to arrange for a translating and interpreting service. Alternatively, there may be 2 or more aged care recipients who would prefer to have a phone call with AHA in a group setting. This may involve you arranging a suitable and private venue for them to gather in and speak with AHA, or arranging a suitable date and time for AHA to initiate a group call with these clients. In both of these circumstances, it may be worth helping the aged care recipient to add AHA's phone number to their mobile phone contacts where this is relevant, so they'll be able to recognize AHA's number when they call. It's important to note that your involvement in the process should end with setting up the conversation. Provider representatives should not be present when aged care recipients complete or give verbal or written feedback to AHA. You may wish to consider involving other organizations such as your local older person advocacy network, care finders, or relevant community organizations to help facilitate the aged care recipient feedback process. AHA will then use the feedback to assess your application.
We encourage you to familiarise yourself with the framework and the criteria. This specialist verification process is about ensuring that clients can make informed choices. All the actions listed align with the aged care quality standards and good inclusive diversity and wellness approaches. Moving forward, we recommend you review your My Aged Care information. Have you identified any specialisations? Do you want to enhance your service offerings so that you can demonstrate you are a specialised service? Conduct a self-assessment against this criteria and use it as an opportunity to benchmark where you're at. In addition to viewing this session, we strongly encourage you to visit the Department of Health website, where you can now view a recording of the Department's specialisation webinar and also access the framework and the provider guidance material. We know that the department has been encouraging providers to review their My Aged Care Find a Provider information through their bids notices, and I really encourage you to speak with your portal administrator to ensure that any of the required changes are made. This is who we are, and of course both Dale and myself are available to provide support across the eastern metropolitan area of Melbourne as required. We have lots of really great resources on our website, and of course you can access and download these at the address on your screen. We look forward to being able to view your specialisations on My Aged Care.